Woe unto the poor man who has to excogitate, who has to think after his enjoyment of life, writes Herder in his Ideas on the Philosophy of the History of Humanity, which I have here as an edition from, I think, the 1920s. What Herder means by humanity, by the way, is not a metaphysical concept. It's not a universal concept, if you like. It's, in fact, it's the active relationship between individuals that can lead to humanity, Menschheit. And of course, we are dealing with Geschichte, with, let's say, history. So it must be something that happens rather than something that can just be deduced out of itself a priori. And in the 8th book, Herder addresses the nature of happiness and what it means to be happy, glückselig. And as you just heard, it cannot just simply be that one theorizes his way towards happiness, as it were. So this is a warning, of course, at the time against rationalistic enlightenment tendencies. And I've written the book, which you can see here, on eudaimonia and eudaimonia in Aristotle, usually translated as happiness, which addresses how Aristotle understands eudaimonia, which I understand as the familiarity of the world, which comes from the active participation in a polis. And at the very end of the book of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, but also in my book, I do address the notion of theoria, but I show throughout the book, a link to which you find in the description of this video, by the way, that there's actually not really much of a distinction between praxis and theoria that we supposedly have inherited from Aristotle. But instead, a theoria, theorein, is this taking into consideration, it is in the activity, in the commerce, if you like, of life. And so in the end, when theoria is then elevated to a divine seeing, this is not something, again, that is to do with excogitating or thinking hard about the labor of the concept, as Hegel puts it. It's actually quite something different. It's a sudden seeing of the divine nous through our own human nous, which is possible in a healthy and well-ordered polis. I want to address a few more things on Herder. And before I do so, I'd like to invite you to join a course at my Halcyon Academy, which, if that be on Heidegger, on German idealism, on Hegel, on Nietzsche, Goethe's Faust, that will help guide you through these texts on the one hand that are discussed in the courses, but also help you find some grounding or safe haven in an apparently rather mad time. Just know that these times will pass too, and it is as mad as everything as it seems, only because that sort of frenzy breaks out already after the end, let's say. So one should stay rather relaxed about everything. And let's hear about happiness in Herder. But before I do so, there's, as I said before, humanity to Herder is active, is the activity of how human beings act together, how they enact a certain, towards a higher education perhaps, but each to their own capacity and within their own culture. So it's not a universalistic, homogenizing conception of a sterile oneness of which humanity is then an accident. No, This is the working together of individuals, each within their own culture and language. And there's no hierarchy between those. Herder is very clear about this. And he has a very interesting understanding of the word, of the notion of Vernunft, of reason, extremely different from Kant. The German word Vernunft is striking. The English reason is the same as the French raison, means ground, but also, let's say, rationality. It comes, of course, from the Latin ratio. So it's rational when everything hangs together with something else. But there's always a tendency, of course, in rationality to be a priori, to be outside experience, to be independent of experience, let's say. Not so for Herder. When you listen to the German word Vernunft, it comes from vernehmen, which means to take something, to perceive, yes, but to take something in also, to be aware of. And to Herder, Vernunft, let's say reason, is, and I'm thinking just now what might be actually a better translation for Vernunft than reason. Perception is not the best, perhaps. Taking into consideration, perhaps, taking into concern, or the capacity to be concerned might be a good, perhaps. It's not, yeah, it's not the best translation, but maybe just care or concern in this neutral sense, being able to. So Heidegger's care, of course, here comes to mind, etc. So it's not rationality that's very important. So when I say reason, you have to hear something else. You have to hear Vernunft. So reason is an aggregate of notions of something that we have, that one has perceived or noticed perhaps also, and of exercises of our soul, and of course always, however, so not a priori, but of what the soul is able to exercise in experience. A sum of education, of our Geschlecht, as he says, of our entire, we could say perhaps of our entire being, that's to say of everyone who's in the extended chain of being to which we belong, our extended family, which according to given foreign or strange Vorbilder, idols or ideal situations, perhaps, let's say, idols is not ideal, perhaps, but a certain image that we aspire to, the one who's been educated in the end as a strange artist completes or perfects within himself. So we are addressed by something that's foreign to us in education. Let's say when we read the classics in our culture. And this is strange to us, but we then, as an artist, can turn this into something of our own. And reason is an aggregate of it, of everything that the soul has noticed, let's say, and what it's exercised. So that's to say that reason grows. There might be a potential for it, but it doesn't even have to go this far. And this is why we're dealing here with Geschichte, history proper. Even reason is, in that sense, historical and epochal. It has a certain epoch, and then reason, as being an aggregate, changes again. And as existence is its own end. And you see, by the way, with this sort of fatalism that's out there, which is neo-Christianity in disguise very often, and nothing else. So eschatology is about the end, the impending end of the world, or that nothing ever really happens, that all is just hyper real. These are absolutizations of one's own epoch that fail to see the limitation of one's own time, and also hence the limitation of one's own capacity even to see one's own epoch clearly. And perhaps, on the part of those who can only ever see in this cynical, distanced manner, see the world in this way, maybe that's just the aggregate of their quote unquote Vernunft, of their reason, of the exercises of their soul and of their particular education. Um, and so existence is its own end. Hence, it is already being its own end, very similar to Aristotle, just to mention Aristotle again. Even to exist, to be, is in itself good. It is in and for itself good. That you exist, that you are, that you live is in itself good. And so this contentness, and Herder is often very strong when he talks about savages or non-European peoples in their own culture and civilization, as he refers to. They might very often be actually much more content and happy, much more capable of living. And he explicitly addresses here, the sort of dried up, overly stimulated, overly intellectualized European man who is not capable, who is sort of sick unto life, bowed down by the heavy weight of, we might say today, of information, of knowledge. So the idea is, as in Aristotle, to round everything, to bring it all together, to be well rounded, and in some sense also, as he says here, to enjoy the happiness of childish or childlike rather dreams of youth. Or dreams of youth is supposed to say, dreams that come to one in one's youth, on what life is. So there's a certain immediacy, let's say, about happiness. And everything that's alive, by being alive, again, that's, I would say, very close to Aristotle, is happy. It finds joy with being alive, as he says here. It doesn't ask, and it doesn't excogitate why it's there. And so anything that's alive, the joy of life is in living, is in being alive. There's no need to find, let's say, even the question why. Why am I here? Why do I have to live, etc. So this is a simple but deep, as he says, an irreplaceable feeling of existence. And this is happiness, Glückseligkeit, or eudaimonia. Let's use this word perhaps. And it is one small drop from this infinite ocean of the oversoul, which is in everything, and which is pleased and finds joy in everything, by everything, and feels everything. And hence, some European men, as he points out, or some Europeans, are so enthused by the indestructible joy and happiness that we see in the faces and in the lives of other peoples, not European. Why? Because the European is of a disquieted, of an impatient restlessness, and hence is not capable of feeling such. And as he points out also, that a people that gives itself over to revenge can never be content, can never feel joy or happiness. And however, of course, he points out that we are not so much perhaps beings just of lack, but we are always surrounded by lack. And so we have to find ways to, if not overcome lack, but to deal with lack. Um, to say the obvious, the human being is the mammal that has the longest childhood and youth. It takes us very long to find a stand in life, decades. And it can all slip away within a second. And there is something in us that perhaps I would say is to do that we are beings of lack, but this is what drives us also. And it is with art and subterfuge, as he points out, that we can sometimes, or can to a certain extent, deal with that lack. But the problem is that when we respond with art, so he speaks of art, we might say Kunst, so we might actually say technology. When we respond with technology, that's sort of the Ouroboros structure, the self-eating serpent of technology, is that technology, so again, Herder speaks of Kunst, so we might say art. If you read this in translation, it would say art, but technology might be a much better way to understand what he's after here. And subterfuge also. We tend to generate more problems, let's say, to try and solve some of the other problems. This is, it seems, something inherent in European um, mankind, and one that isn't perhaps found to that extent, at least in other ways of being human. And so we, well, he uses what's now become a bit of a joke, that the rose of happiness cannot be without thorns. But but what we have to be mindful of is what comes off these thorns. And this is, again, this is up to the different cultures. So the thorns are not necessarily only harmful. They can also protect the rose and hence happiness. But of course, one can also perhaps harm oneself in trying to attain, by all means necessary, sort of externalized version of happiness. And he warns that, again, against the backdrop, let's say, of the Enlightenment, that of an overly rationalistic way of being, that we are not capable of dealing with all too many thoughts and even sensations. So to translate this into our time, he might be speaking of, again, sensory overload. I mean, I remind you, you are watching this on YouTube, and if you are, you catch yourself perhaps right now doing 5 other things at the same time, all of them online, maybe on 5 other tabs that are open. While you should, if you listen to something, perhaps just for that brief time, listen. And then maybe perhaps after that, take notes and read the book yourself. But he also speaks of this, let's just say, too much, an overload of sensations, of sensory sensations. And of course, our time is even more so this. So he addresses something that's genuine about his time, but it translates still to our time, and even more so, perhaps because we are so bombarded, let ourselves be bombarded, that we react mostly to the stimuli from without. And he addresses something striking about the overly educated and intellectualized man of the European city. He actually speaks of a clogged up heart, or a polluted heart of the idle cosmopolitan in is not a hut for anyone, as he says. So we, find cosmopolitans in the big cities who are confronted with all sorts of stimuli from without to keep us interested in all the different things. Um, these are not huts. These are not dwelling grounds for anyone. These clogged up hearts. And he says here that also the savage might actually be of a truer essence and live a truer existence than jene gebildete Schatten, so highly educated shadows, who only exists or is only enthused by the shadow of his family, that is to say, for its name. So I don't know if he's addressing someone in particular here, but he's definitely, I think, if you just look at the context, addressing the Enlightenment era and the belief in rationalism, and the belief also that the world will be healed and saved by universalizing European rationality to just about the last corners of the planet. Herder sees, so it's very striking that at the same time as you have French rationalism and Prussian rationalism with Kant, uh, take the lead across Europe. You have Herder, who, of course, ultimately a follower to some extent of Giambattista Vico, even if I don't know if Herder read Vico, but you have an entirely different understanding of modernity. And this is something else I've been thinking about, is that we need to look for and articulate this other modernity that's also possible, that's also still in the offing, really. And Herder, I think, together with Vico and Dante, even, are some of the ways to find this, to combat the uprooted cosmopolitanism that begins with the Cartesian subjects. And the focus, of course, is on this, again, on the simple yet profound contentness, happiness, eudaimonia, familiarity of the world that is the meaning of existence as such. Speaking of nihilism, etc., it's actually quite simple if you don't yearn for your own ego to exist forevermore, which is what apparently so much of nihilism is actually born out of. So thank you very much for listening. Again, I'd like to invite you to join one of the courses at the Halcyon Academy. Follow the link in the description of this video and pick whichever one suits you the most wherever you are currently in your thinking path. Thank you.